on the record, never seen teddy bears, never heard about them.
Hello and welcome to The Royals. I'm Kate Mansey, Royal Editor of The Times. And here is where I would usually say, hello, Roya. But Roya's on holiday this week. However, do not fret because I am not alone. Today, I will be doing what I've become accustomed to doing over my years as a royal correspondent. I'll be trying to squeeze as much information out of a royal press secretary as possible.
As we discussed earlier, Kate, how many ways can I say no comment in different languages?
That voice is the voice of Ailsa Anderson, former press secretary to the Queen, who went from being a newspaper journalist to doing the poacher turned gamekeeper route of communications, and was press secretary to the late Queen Elizabeth II from 2001 to 2013, and to date, in the time that I've been doing this job, the longest serving press secretary that I've known, during which time she dealt with 2 jubilees, the death of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the wedding of the current Prince and Princess of Wales, and subsequent birth of Prince George, in which she played a starring role, which she may or may not tell me about in a bit. And of course, she did loads more in between, such as leading communications on historic state visits, both inward and outward, becoming Bessie mates with Obama, and all sorts of other incredible things. But for listeners, Ailsa, what does the press secretary to the Queen or King do?
Well, Kate, first of all, thank you so much for that introduction. You make me sound much better than I actually am. So I think you should be in PR rather than me. So thank you. What does a press secretary do? Well, first of all, so as you said, I was a journalist. Then I worked in government communications. So I was chief press officer at the Cabinet Office before going to the household. So I sort of thought, I've got this nailed. I worked for a cabinet minister, heart of government. Alistair Campbell was sort of, at the time, front and centre in Downing Street. So I was slightly cocky going to work in the royal household. I thought, nothing's going to faze me. How wrong could I be? I mean, so many faux pas I made, so many mistakes, dressing someone by their wrong title, standing in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing. But so
it was a bit of a change of force going from government
absolutely
into the palace, because I think a lot of people do that. Yeah. That is a kind of tried and tested route. So you might be comms at the MOD or Cabinet Office, and then you'll go into the palace. Sometimes they go on a secondment and never leave because
that was me.
Because if you're popular in the palace, they don't want to let you go. Yeah. But it is a different kettle of fish because it's a completely different world, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And why is that? Is it because you've got that kind of one boss right at the top?
I think so. I think it's also the complete obsession by the media for the trivial and the minutiae. I mean, that's the thing, coming from government where it's all policy-based, to actually having this incredible hunger and appetite for, what someone's wearing, what hat have they got on? Did they pat a horse or didn't they pat a horse? It was just absolutely extraordinary.
But that's the thing with the late Queen, that there was the tiniest little bit of news would go everywhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, once you're talking about what she had in her handbag, and this story that she had she would take a kind of £5 folded up banknote in her handbag to church for the collection. And that was, something like that would be huge, which for any other person or government minister or anything wouldn't be a story, or any other celebrity. What's in your handbag?
I mean, I suppose from the, on the plus side, it's quite easy to sell in a story because everyone's appetite for those sort of stories are, second to none. So where in government you might have a policy and it's actually really difficult to explain it or get it sold into the press, you'd never have a problem like that in the royal household.
You're pushing at an open door.
An open door.
The flip side of that, of course, is if there's a story that you don't want out there, that's going to go around the world very quickly, unless you can kind of guide the narrative, or if there's something. What happens if somebody comes to you, or there's something out there and it's wrong?
Yeah, and it's done.
How does that sort of machine then kick in?
That's a really, really good point, because ultimately you're dealing with human beings, people's lives. And I remember, I'm not going to say who it was, but a member of the royal family coming into my office in absolute tears because they had read something in a newspaper which was absolutely factually incorrect.
This is a member of the royal family coming in?
Absolutely. And they said,
can you say who it was?
No, I can't. Sorry.
But they've got the newspaper, they're coming into your... So that would happen. They would come into your office and say... And sort of hold it in the air and say...
In tears and say, look, my family have read this, my friends have read this. And You've got to make that judgment, give that advice. If you start rebutting, there might be one or two elements of the story that are factually accurate. But if you start rebutting, you're setting a precedent, and you're going to be asked about all the other elements of it. So that's tricky. If the story's not going anywhere, if it's if it's dead in the water, then if you start rebutting or making a comment, then you're actually creating a story of your own making, and you're giving it legs to carry on. So it is a judgment call.
Well, yeah. So sort of Palace was last night forced to deny kind of a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you've done a few of those.
Well, that's the sort of thing that you're trying to avoid, I suppose.
Absolutely. You just want to shut it down.
But then you've got the member of the royal family who you would address as Sir or
His Royal Highness, Her Royal Highness.
You would say Your Royal Highness.
Yeah.
Your Royal Highness, they've got it wrong. They say, well, what are you going to do about it?
Absolutely.
And sometimes the answer is the best
Nothing.
thing is nothing.
Yeah.
But how do they take that?
Well, again, if it's something personal, they're human beings. I would feel the same as well, especially if my family, my children had read something about me that wasn't true.
Right.
But it's hopefully they listen to your experience and your judgment. And if no one is asking about the story, what you need to point out is if we do start rebutting it and going out on the front foot, you're drawing attention to a story which no one else is picking up. So let sleeping dogs lie.
Yes, but then there's the other kind of element of it that if the story has been going for several days, was there a kind of test point that you learnt from your time in government where you kind of thought, well, if there's a certain number of days for a story, then you need to regroup around your PR strategy?
Absolutely. I mean, I wasn't there for it, but you look at the Prince Andrew story with Jeffrey Epstein and the Newsnight interview. That story was on the front pages for Kate, how many days, weeks? It's got repercussions now. So what do you do about that apart from not do the interview in the first place?
Yes. Well, that would have been great advice, wouldn't it? So, presumably advice you would have given the Duke of York if you were there.
I didn't have all the facts to hand. We've all seen it. There are two dramas made out of it now. One's already been broadcast, one's coming up at the end of the year. So not only have you got the Newsnight's actual story, you've got dramatisations of it. So not helpful.
But the dramatisation, are the teddy bears true? Because we know about the teddy bears on Duke of York's bed.
I have not seen the Duke of York's bed. I just like to go on the record and say that. But I've never heard about teddy bears.
Okay.
Promise. I promise. As I think I've said to you lots of times in the past, Kate, what I'm very, very conscious of is that I've never, ever lied to a journalist before. If I can't help you, I can't help you. But it's my integrity. So on the record, never seen teddy bears, never heard about them.
Well, that's what I always liked about dealing with you, Ailsa, was that it was kind of, I knew there were some things that you couldn't help me with, but if I came to you with a story that I'd got exclusively from a contact, I knew, first of all, you wouldn't blab it to my rivals.
No.
Second of all, you wouldn't mislead me or lie about it. I mean, I'm not saying you would always particularly help. There were some elements that you weren't helpful with because, like you say,
I'm wounded.
But I think that's that kind of trust, isn't it, between the palace and the press. And I think sometimes people think it's a really very cosy situation, but certainly that it's not always that way.
No, it's not. But you're just going back to your point about not briefing it to another journalist. If I did that, then you would never come to me again with your exclusive story. So I wouldn't be able to shape anything or knock it down if it wasn't true, because you just think, I'm not going to go to her. She's going to go and screw me over. So, that is, you've got to have some sort of integrity. And also, the boss wouldn't have wanted that. No, she wouldn't want anyone to lie, mislead, or be disrespectful.
So tell us about that first day when you go in and you're looking around at the office. Are there any changes you need to make or?
So I shared an office with another press secretary who just joined the same time as me. And the Royal Collection likes to display all sorts of beautiful paintings across the palace, even in the offices. So I had this amazing, I think it was a Stubbs of a horse, and I love horses, in my office, but obviously hugely impractical. So I asked a member of the Royal Collection to remove it so I could have a notice board put in. And I don't think anyone has ever done that, ever. So I think, my days were numbered from day one, I think.
What was the reaction to that?
They did it, but fairly reluctantly. I saw it somewhere else in the palace a few days later, so I thought,
it's been reused.
It has
somewhere.
been, regifted.
And how does the day look? So you'd go in, presumably you'd read the papers knowing full well that the boss, as you call her, Queen Elizabeth II, was reading
absolutely
a voracious reader of all the papers as well.
Absolutely, she got all of them.
She was across it. You had to be across it. And then what sort of time do you get into the office, Buckingham Palace? What time?
Yeah, so I would crunch past those gravelled forecourt at about 8:30 in the morning, settle down, have a cup of tea, read the papers, read the press cuttings. We would convene for a 9 o'clock meeting with the private secretary, then a 10 o'clock press office meeting so people knew what they were doing. We would have a forward plan to look ahead for engagement, see what other members of the royal family were doing as well. And then the day would be as simple or as complicated as that. It could be filming during the day, there could be a visit, either domestic, there could be audiences, there could be an investiture. I mean, seriously, Kate, no 2 days were the same. It was a massive thrill. I mean, it really was. I would leave that office and just think, wow, who else is as fortunate to do this as the people who work for the household and work for the Queen?
It's quite some office, isn't it, Buckingham Palace? But it's not quite all the kind of glitz and glamour. And obviously now we know there's this big resurfacing project that you must have seen behind the scenes that it really did need doing.
Absolutely.
Because the Queen, as we know, used to go around sort of turning lights off and trying to save money where she could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was she comfortable there? Because she always spent weekends at Windsor, didn't she?
Yeah. Rumour has it, I don't know whether it's true or not, that her favourite residence was Balmoral, and I've stayed there. I can see why. It's absolutely stunning, and it's also, I suppose,
she was a bit more relaxed there as well, wasn't she? I
Metaphorically,
remember
she
you
leaves.
saying that you had a little office in Balmoral, so you would go where she was.
Yeah, absolutely. And they say metaphorically she would leave her crown on the gates as she drove through, to Balmoral Castle, and she was
That's
a very
really interesting,
relaxed, different person. I mean, she still did her red boxes every day. She still worked incredibly hard and was incredibly dutiful. And of course, she'd have the Prime Minister to stay at the weekends. If they were visiting heads of state, she would often see them there. There were the famous barbecues where she had visitors staying. They would go out on the estate and have a barbecue, and they would have to help the Queen do the washing up at the end of it.
They did. So they didn't get out of it.
No, absolutely not. That was, well, what a great thing to tell your kids when you came home. Guess who I did the washing up with. So it's certainly
and was she
more relaxed.
Would she come and talk to you about?
Yeah, but also she would. I remember sitting. So we would stay in Queen Victoria's children's old schoolhouse, which is a sort of stone throws from the actual castle. And I remember sitting at the desk. Doing some work, doing some writing, and there was this sort of tap on the window, and it was the Queen walking the corgis, and she was just checking in to see, hopefully what I was doing some work. So,
checking up on you.
Oh God! Thank goodness I didn't have my feet up watching EastEnders or something.
I love that little kind of smiley Queen face just appearing at the window.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's not like any other normal
Not
job,
really.
is it? But then you'd also go and stay at Windsor Castle, and you'd be all around. And, overseas as well with the Queen.
Absolutely. But it wasn't, obviously the Queen and Prince Philip were put in fantastic accommodation. But for us staff, it's a much more basic. And I always chose to stay with the media. And as you know, the newspapers don't have a lot of money to splash on accommodation and food, etc. So I used to stay in the same hotels as you guys. So
you took one for the team,
rat
Ailsa.
infested, smelly,
keeping an eye on what we're up to.
Absolutely.
Well, that's interesting because there are press officers and press officers, and there's some who try to kind of align themselves more with the royal household, and some that prefer to keep their enemies close. And stay close to
an enemy. I know, but also it's easier to brief if we're holding briefings. If I've got to travel halfway across the city to see you and be with you, that's ridiculous. It's much better, and also you've got access to me.
Yeah.
And if there's a story brewing, I'm going to get wind of it first, I hope, and can do some guidance or get a comment to you.
No, you were very brave when it came to things like that.
I was very brave. I know.
And that kind of old school PR as well. I remember you hosting the Diamond Jubilee when you brought all the journalists in to tell us how it was going to work. And there was this very elaborate kind of river pageant, wasn't there, that was planned. And Gary Barlow was there to give the press conference. And he said, ladies and gentlemen of the press, we've got some bacon sandwiches here for you. And I just thought, yeah, well done, Ailsa. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good start to the press conference if you're trying to persuade journalists.
Butter you up, literally.
Literally butter us up.
Yeah, with a bacon sarnie.
But you were tough as well. There were times when the job must have been tough for you as a mum with two young kids.
Yeah.
And dreading that kind of late night phone call from somebody who's got a stellar scoop, a scoop that you don't want to be out in public. Are there times that you can go back to that you remember from those elements?
Well, you're right. I remember a Christmas. It was a couple of days before Christmas, and I hadn't wrapped any presents. I hadn't any stockings. Henry and Charlotte were little. I was in the kitchen. Yeah, my children.
Kids, yeah.
And I was trying to make a bolognese sauce badly, clearly. And the phone went, and it was the duty private secretary at Sandringham, and Prince Philip had been taken to hospital to Papworth because he had a heart condition.
Right.
And
so that's huge. How do you announce that news?
Well,
how do you?
It's got to be factually. It's got to be factually.
When
we
do you
put
announce
out.
the news?
Absolutely.
That's another element, isn't it?
So there was no rumours going on, so we didn't have to. We wanted to get it right.
So you're already ahead of the curve in
absolutely.
that respect.
Yeah.
It's not
And a statement was drafted, first of all, by the doctors involved, because obviously they can put the medical language in it. And of course, it had to be approved by the Queen. So not only is she head of state, but she's at Sandringham, massively concerned about the health of her husband.
And you're kind of putting a piece of paper. Would it be kind of under her nose and saying, "Mum, what do you think to
absolutely.
this?"
So we drafted it with the doctors and the duty private secretary. I think maybe a couple of changes were made, and we announced it after Prince Philip had a procedure. He had a stent put in his heart, and we announced it after that. So, the message was good. He was conscious when the procedure happened. He'll be recovering, staying in hospital for X number of days. But
I remember that very well because everyone was out of the office pretty much. It was kind of Christmas Eve or something, wasn't it? And I had to phone up my former neighbour who had a set of keys to my house because I was staying at my parents' house for Christmas, and had to get him round to go in, rifle through my drawers, look for my Filofax. That's how long ago it was.
Nothing wrong with the Filofax, Kate.
Yeah, no, and read out these kind of numbers for some of my contacts who were just in there and weren't in my phone stupidly. But that was interesting.
Your mind is racing. I remember going to bed at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, and of course you can't settle down because of all the activity that's been. You've been on the phone.
It's an adrenaline. You have to be a bit of an adrenaline junkie to do that sort of these jobs, I suppose.
Absolutely. And then I went to Papworth Hospital the next day. And I thought, it's a day to Christmas, and actually, looking back, well, my kids appreciate it. 20 years down the road when they say, "Where's my stocking, mummy?"
But that's the element of the sacrifice and the duty, doing a job within the palace that, frankly, you could have been paid sort of umpteen times more outside to do the same job.
What an amazing job. And, I was lucky I had some very good childcare. I had my amazing mum who helped a lot with the kids. But
you were quite brave with that message as well, just going back to Prince Philip, that you gave us quite a lot of information at the time. And I remember thinking, goodness, there's quite a lot of detailed information about what was wrong with him, the fact that he had a stent put in for his arteries. And I thought that was telling an interesting, particularly reflecting on it now in a year when we've had all this kind of medical treatment. How do you think they've reacted this year, the palace, to the details of Kate's cancer diagnosis, the King's cancer diagnosis?
Good. I think they've been brilliant, and it's my heart goes out to them. I've been there. I know exactly what is going through, and you're in the middle of a tornado, and everything is spinning around, and you're just waiting for the world to stop so you can catch your breath and then strategically plan your next move.
Right.
But when the phone is ringing off the hook, I think I remember telling you about from the sublime to ridiculous. I remember being the duty press secretary on a Saturday, and I must have got about 50 or 60 phone calls from domestic and international media because Prince Philip had gone on an engagement and he had a plaster on his hand. And you think, oh my goodness.
A sort of minor cut on his hand, but then people were wanted to know, thought it was a huge story.
Absolutely. And I thought, I can't actually phone His Royal Highness or, his private secretary and ask why he's got a plaster on, because I'm going to get a massive telling off down the phone. People are dealing with poverty and, financial insecurities and, death and destruction. And yet, I get 60 calls because Prince Philip's got a plaster on his hand.
So it's interesting, the sensitivities. And what had happened, or was it one of those moments you just thought,
it just grazed his hand?
Yeah.
End of.
So even now I'm curious to know what it was. I still want to know. But that's interesting. Hearing the sensitivities, the other side of the wall, if you like. So I'm the journalist ringing up about something. You're on the other side, and sometimes we don't understand. Why doesn't the palace just say? But this idea that the sensitivities are that they don't want to be seen to be putting out information at a time when there's war, there's
absolutely,
poverty.
because it looks like it's
people can't make
me.
their bills because it looks like they've put out that story saying Prince Philip hurt his hand today because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the sensitivity. So that's interesting, actually, because I think sometimes people don't realise why the palace is being obstructive, but because the fear is that it might be seen that they're putting it out, deliberately to tell, because
Poor me, yes,
poor me, I've
absolutely.
got a poor, That's interesting. And they're conscious then. It all comes into how the royal family is seen and how the public perceive them.
But also everyone, whether you're a prince or a pauper, everyone is entitled to your own private health issues. So, if you're going to start commenting about a plaster on someone's hand, when does that lead to? When do you stop?
But it's kind of the public consumption element, isn't it? That when are you there to inform the public about what's going on with the royal family, and when they become private individuals, and then the shutters go up and it's the kind of no comment line.
Absolutely. But just going back to your point again, you've issued a statement saying he had a cut on his hand because of so-and-so. You'll get people who didn't realise this is in response to a media question saying, why are they putting themselves out there? Who cares if he's got a cut on his finger?
That's interesting, though. That's
because the journalists are asking.
What about the time that somebody calls you with a story and it's the first time you've ever heard of it, and it's a journalist and you don't know where it's coming from. Someone's blabbed something somewhere. I mean, the omerta around the palace is, it's very hard to break through to that, to get those contacts. But when you do, you hold them close as a journalist. But the other side of it is that it means that I could be coming to you with something that you've never heard of before, perhaps, or you've known about for a while. You were hoping it wouldn't come out. Can you think of a time when that's happened, and how did you deal with it? I feel like this is a job interview.
Don't have a pass yet.
Flying colours.
It's interesting you say that, and I'm always quite amused by how many royal experts or royal insiders there are that are quoted by newspapers or broadcast media, and it could be someone who once shook hands with a member of the royal family on a walkabout, and suddenly they're a royal expert. So sometimes the truth is stretched somewhat. May I say?
Can you share that?
But it's interesting what you said about so. I remember I was at Windsor Castle. There'd been an event and I was staying overnight in a little single bedroom in a turret somewhere, like Cinderella. And I got...
Even that sounds so glamorous, though. You're painting it out like poor me.
With the mice on
Rapunzel,
the floor.
Rapunzel.
I know, let down her. And I got a call on a mobile phone. Yes, we did have technology then. From... the BBC's then royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell.
Oh, yeah.
And Nicholas, all sort of breathy, came on the phone and said, Ailsa, I've got it on really good authority that the Queen Mother's dead.
Oh, gosh.
And I thought, oh, my golly, not on my watch, please. And I thought, someone, as clued in and connected as Nicholas Witchell.
Yeah.
So I
took it very seriously.
Very, very seriously, the old heart beating. And I phoned the Queen Mother's private secretary and said, Alistair, I've just been called by Nicholas Witchell from the BBC. He's told me that the Queen Mother's dead. And Alistair said, hold on a minute. Ma'am, the BBC seem to think you're dead. Oh, how funny. So clearly she was, and I've never been so pleased to hear a conversation in the background in my life.
I bet you enjoyed making that phone call back.
Oh, yeah, I sure did. It's always nice to knock a story down. Authentically, yeah.
So how do you PR the palace in normal times? How do you PR the palace when something really is kind of hitting the fan or going awry? And you've lived through some of those times. Sadly, of course, the Queen Mother did die and you had to manage that. But you've seen births as well.
I have.
Tell us about your role in Prince George's announcement.
I'm just going to tease you slightly for a minute, Kate, when you say PRing the palace, that what the Queen would hate, late Queen would hate to hear was if the palace was PR'd. Honestly, my head would be on a chopping block up in the tower.
Why? What would she say to that?
Because if her thing was about duty and honour and service, so you're not, she's doing it in a genuine way that the monarch did.
So it's not a kind of
PR.
I don't have a spin operation.
Absolutely, gosh,
right?
No. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so not PRing the palace.
so not PRing, not kind of putting out, but just sort of illuminating some of the work that they do.
Absolutely, and also it's not
being open.
It's not necessarily about them. It's putting the spotlight on the charities that they're involved with, what they're patron of. So actually, those organisations that probably will go unrecognised unless they had a member of the royal family as a patron. So it's a spotlight on them.
You've told me off now. I can't remember what I was saying. I feel like I've been told off by the Queen.
No! Never tell you off, Kate.
What was I saying?
Prince George.
Oh yeah, Prince George. Baby Prince George is born. It's a huge. Everyone goes nuts. We'd had the royal wedding in 2011.
Were you outside the hospital?
Yeah.
Wow. How long were you outside for?
It was boiling. It was absolutely roasting. Do you remember?
I do.
That summer. And yeah, I think it was a big thing because it was the kind of this next generation
of
the royal family, of the heir, the heir to the heir to the, there was this line of succession. Everyone was excited. Nobody knew if it was going to be a boy or girl. They had changed the rules of royal primogeniture or male primogeniture in order to sanction that if it was a baby girl, that she would be the first in line to the throne after William.
Yeah.
And it was a big deal. There were just people kind of camped outside for days. But you were behind the scenes in a way, which was interesting because back then it wasn't, Charles taking over as the grandfather, and it wasn't even William. But back then it was very much the Queen was the boss.
Yes.
Her press secretary was the person who was going to be, putting that announcement out there. And so, enter stage Ailsa Anderson.
I know, it's very weird. Thanks. It was very weird for someone who's a spokesperson. You're never quoted by name in a newspaper or on broadcast media to actually be on telly. And I remember coming home after all the excitement and posting the announcement.
So what
on
did
the
you do?
railings.
Just tell us what you actually did.
So,
people who don't remember.
The formal announcement on Buckingham Palace notepaper is put in a beautiful, beautiful frame. It's signed by all the medical team who were part of the birth, and it's basically just the facts. So, mother and baby doing well, weight, time of birth. So I walked across the palace forecourt,
Buckingham Palace
forecourt, with a lovely colleague footman, and we chained this announcement on the railings, which was photographed and recorded by Telly and the Press Association. And then people started queuing to see the announcement. So it was amazing.
Yeah.
And we went back into the office and all had a sigh of relief. And
I think I you cracked open a bottle of champagne, which would have been the natural response.
I did that when I got home. Anyway, I got home and my son, who I don't know how old he was at the time, not very old, said, "Mummy, we saw you on television. What's for supper?"
Boom, right back down to earth. how to knock away when she's up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, kids and dogs always keep you grounded.
Yeah, well, there's a nice picture I've seen of you with the corgis, actually, talking about dogs.
Gosh.
Were you friends with the corgis? They're little terrors,
I've got a Labrador, Kate, so I think that's enough said.
I think we know what you're saying about the corgis there. Yeah,
that was amazing. We were doing some filming at Sandringham, and after the camera crew's gone, I went and just said to the Queen, "Thank you so much," because I wanted to film her with the corgis walking across the lawn. Yeah. And she stood there chatting about these corgis and dorgies, and I got a masterclass in sort of dog breeding. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I think, certainly for the Queen, once the cameras are away and sort of all the sort of officialdom goes, she can really be herself. And of course, nothing she likes more than talking about animals. So it was just amazing. Just amazing.
It's nice to have that kind of those experiences with her.
Yeah.
And also, it must be strange for you seeing William grow up and have Prince George and Harry, of course, because you know those princes when they were a lot younger. And would you see them sort of walking around the palace? What was your kind of connection with them? Because I know you knew them to chat to.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, they didn't stay at Buckingham Palace. They only came for official events. But I've got a lovely photograph of Prince Harry and myself standing outside a ladies' loo, which is very classy.
What was he saying? He's got his arm around you, hasn't he, at one point?
I couldn't possibly comment.
There we go.
But that was part of the Diamond Jubilee concert, and there was a reception afterwards. So that was fun
wonderful.
Then. He was.
Maybe he's fun now. I don't know, but what do you think?
I don't know now. I don't know. I haven't seen him for a number of years, but certainly my involvement with him when I was at the palace, he was lovely. He was charming. He was interesting. all the things that you've probably written about. I think personally, the Invictus Games, which he has founded and supported, is extraordinary. I'm a daughter of a naval officer. I know for a fact how many injured servicemen really, really appreciate it. I think he's incredibly passionate about it, and that wouldn't have happened without him.
We're both daughters of the Navy, aren't we?
You as well?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Oh my God, we could be sisters.
Yeah, exactly. You can be my glamorous, sister. But yeah, we never really knew what the Queen thought. I think with the King, he may not do interviews as King, who knows? But he certainly hasn't done yet. But I wonder if we can kind of guess what he thinks, can't we? In a way that we never could with the Queen.
Yeah, but
would she tell you what she thought of things? I mean, would you?
Kate, if she did, I'm afraid I couldn't
possibly
or
comment.
deny.
Listeners are getting an insight into.
But I can talk about. I'll give you an example of her incredible. I think I've told you this story previously. Her incredible kindness to her staff, and it was during the state visit by President and Mrs. Obama.
Oh.
And obviously all the formalities on day one at Horse Guards Parade. And then there is an arrivals lunch where the Queen's senior staff and the visiting heads of state senior staff have lunch with the principals. And I was standing at a pre-lunch reception chatting to another member of the household. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see the Queen moving towards us with President Obama. And I thought, I wonder who the Queen's taking him to talk to. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. Anyway, she came straight towards me.
Fantastic.
And she said, President Obama, this is my press secretary. Her husband is in the Royal Navy. And he started saying, oh, ma'am, I can't do an American accent, so apologies. Your husband does an amazing job. Please tell him from me that, what extraordinary. And all I could think was, oh, my golly, the Queen has just introduced me to President Obama. You have the think bubble. And I talked gibberish at him for about 30 seconds and then slunk off. But I mean, how kind is that to do that?
That's very kind.
Didn't have to.
That's very kind indeed. And a moment that you'll never forget.
Never forget.
Inside the palace, the more minutiae, did you ever swim in the pool?
I did.
Did you?
Yes.
Is it good? Is it nice? Is it a
It's
bit grubby?
basic.
It's basic.
Yes.
Ah.
Sorry.
Is there a cash point? Did you use the cash machine?
Yes.
Does it charge you?
No.
Okay. That's so fascinating. I feel like I need to go back on the swimming pool as well, because I think...
It's really cold.
How long is it?
Oh,
Is it like 20 metres or something?
I don't know what 20 metres looks like.
Is it like small?
Yeah.
Yeah. And did the Queen ever use it?
No. But Diana did, famously.
Did she? Interesting.
Yeah.
And the kids learnt to swim in there, presumably?
I presume so.
Yeah. Wow. And so you're allowed to use that as staff, or is it because you were special?
No, you book special.
You book in?
Yeah.
To make sure that there for that.
No. Can you imagine if there's that? Buckingham Palace pool. There's tennis courts as well in the garden, so we used to book those as well in the evenings. Play tennis. You could bring guests in to play tennis.
Gosh, this is a big advert for working at the palace, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Well, it's good to know there were some perks. But
lots of perks.
What was your... Yeah, lots of perks indeed. What was your... what were your highlights?
Oh.
Looking back, there's so much. I mean, I hope you've written all this down. You can't write a book, can you? You're not allowed to.
No book writing.
So just tell us all the stuff you're
allowed to write. It would help I could spell as well, so and write properly. I think there's a golly, Kate. Too much, and it's not necessarily those sort of big sort of state visits, not the islands, even though that was incredible, and you felt like you really were sitting on the shoulder of history doing that. And I was present when the late Queen met Martin McGuinness, and again, you feel like this is almost the most extraordinary event in ordinary circumstances. I mean, it was amazing. So
it was the handshake, wasn't there? Yeah. Which was groundbreaking.
Absolutely,
after
and
the troubles
moving.
And everything.
Yeah. So, all those big things obviously will never. I'll never forget. But it's also the small things as well. I mean, going on an engagement. To a primary school, and the Queen would come back and say, did you hear what that little boy said? She would always find something to remember or to talk about or to recollect. And I think remarkable in a 70-year reign that you can still find joy and interest from, a sort of a fairly normal royal engagement.
So she still loved meeting all different people, even right to the end.
Absolutely. And
Prince Philip seemed to love it. He used to he seemed like he fed off it. Like
Yeah.
there was an energy that he was
Yes,
such an extrovert,
absolutely.
wasn't he?
Yeah.
That he really got energy from being in a room with
And when
people
you-
and meeting them.
Totally. And when you spoke to him, you would feel that you're the most important person, in that room. It's like a beacon shining on you. He'd make you
Really,
feel
that sort of charismatic kind of
Yes,
leader type.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes so many people you hear say, "I've met the Queen, but I have no idea what I said to her because it's just all in a sort of in a bubble." And you hear that a lot. I remember talking to Helen Mirren. There was a reception at the Palace, and we were in a room waiting. There's a lineup of people waiting to be presented. And Helen Mirren said, "I'm quite nervous." And I said, "Golly, you've just won an Oscar for playing the Queen, and now you're meeting her. How can you be nervous?" And she said, "Well, this is someone who's been in my life, all of my life. And now to actually meet her," she said, it's really funny to get your head around."
I'm very privileged and pleased that you are able to join me today because you're very important and have been an important part of the story, although you have succeeded in not becoming the story.
Thank goodness, and long may that continue.
Well, yeah, it's always sort of rule number one, don't become the story.
Absolutely.
And you haven't, but I'm so thrilled that you were able to share some of your experiences with us
It's been
today.
a joy. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.